I would like to dedicate this talk tonight to my dear friend and mentor, Bill Resch. I miss your partner, but I know you're here. I was sitting in the woods, on the ground, cross-legged, t-shirt, shorts, late summer morning, nice bird song. I was tucked in the brush, and if you had walked by, you wouldn't have seen me. I was there for a while, long enough so that my mind was clear, and I didn't feel that division that you sometimes feel between you and everything else. I felt one with everything. And then I heard a sound behind me that didn't fit in, like a soft rustling sound with the leaves kind of crunching. And I thought, chipmunk? I didn't move because when you make motion in the woods, that's an alarm call. You lose your invisibility, and I didn't want to lose that, so I sat still but relaxed, and it got closer. It seemed to be approaching me almost on a direct line, but it was taking its time. Squirrel? And then I knew it was right behind my back. It took all my self-control not to turn around and look. And then I felt it. It was leaning into me, soft, warm, fuzzy, alive something. And it started to move around the left side of my body, and it was at my hip. I pulled my eyes over to the side as far as I could see, and I couldn't quite get a glimpse. And then it jumped. Rabbit! It sat in front of me and had this leafy thing in its mouth, and it was munching. And it was looking at me with that eye that they have on the side of their head. And just for a split moment, I thought, felt, heard in my head, "Good morning, granddaughter." And I thought, laughed silently, heard back, "Good morning, grandmother." And then the rabbit just kind of continued munching and slowly went away. I made an actual decision in college that I wanted to build a relationship with grandmother. Grandmother is the earth. And I worked at it. Every free moment I had, I would get in my car and I'd drive to the nearest metro park. And I would jump onto a trail, and then when no one was watching, I would sneak off trail and hit the deer trails. That's when I learned to follow my intuition. That was the first language that I discovered. And if I followed my intuition, what would happen is it would take me places and I would see things that were incredible. One of the first things I remember seeing were deer playing tag. And as I watched them, there was nothing else they would do. They would chase each other and turn around like, "You're it." And I realized they knew each other intimately. They were family. And then I remember this one time, I was just standing on the trail, and a mink came zooming by my feet. And then it zoomed by again a couple minutes later. And then again. And I was cleaning out a nest of baby rabbits. And then there was this time that I snuck into the woods a little bit early before dawn. And I went to a deer trail, and I thought, I'm going to see the deer. They're not going to see me. And I backed off a little bit, and I laid down on the ground, and I propped my head up, and I watched the light change as the sun rose. And then I heard it, the sound of movement coming down that deer trail, and I was ready. And as I watched, two heads poked up over the ridge, and it was coyotes. And they knew it. They moved down that trail and hit a spot and left the trail and came right at me. Came right at me and came up close. And we looked at each other. I kind of rolled over to the other side. And that coyote was just, its body was full of curiosity. I didn't know they had such big ears. And it looked at me and I looked at them. And the other coyote behind the first one was pretty nervous, hair sticking up, looking at the first coyote, looking at the most dangerous animal in the world. And we studied each other, fascinated. And then I was dismissed. I could feel it. And he stuck his nose up in the air and he waved it back and forth, picking up a scent trail. And then they were gone. Once I stood on a boulder, and it was a huge boulder, and I was standing there as obvious as can be, watching the sunset. And this doe showed up right in front of me. And her fawn came out of nowhere and started nursing. That's when I realized that I had established a bond with the more than human world. Grandmother speaks to us in intuition, signs and symbols, and through feeling and emotion. So whenever I want to talk to grandmother, that's where I need to be too. I realized soon that the best way to communicate was for me to go to the woods and sit down and hold still, to get in that space. And wait. She always came. One time she came when I really needed her. I was actually on a trip in the state of Oregon, and I had 4 days to myself, no people to take care of, and I packed up the mosquito netting and a tarp, and I hit the backcountry. And I spent those 4 days exploring, but I saved my favorite exploration for that last day. You see, in that country there were these high cliffs, and I had been told that when they had logged there in the early 1900s, they couldn't get their machinery up there. And there were still some huge old-growth trees, and I wanted to see them. And I knew just the way up, because on that cliff there had been a landslide at some point, and it was all cleared out, and it was a straight shot. And I thought, I'm going to climb up that landslide all the way to the top. Just the dirt and soil, no trees and brush to work around. So I packed my bag early in the morning at dawn, and I headed for the landslide. And I started climbing. And it was a wonderful climb. It was just this nice, gentle slope, and I prided myself on the rock climber that I used to be, and a handhold and a foothold, and worked my way up the cliff. But I was really focused, and I lost my awareness. And I remember at one point, I simply stopped, and I pulled my head back, and I looked around, and I realized that it wasn't a nice, gentle slope anymore. It was a vertical one. And I thought, standing on a vertical side of a mountain way up there on loose soil and rock isn't a good idea. But that's okay, because 10 steps in either direction, there was a bunch of trees and brush and rooted soil, and I could go there. So I did. I turned, and I took a step, and I took another. And on the 3rd step, that soil and rock gave way. And before I knew it, I was on my back, and I was sliding down. The first thought that occurred to me was, you really do accelerate when you're going downhill, because I was picking up great speed. And the second thought I had with clarity was simply, I'm going to die. It's just a fact. And I knew that there was nothing between me and the bottom, because I just climbed it. But I raised my head up anyway as I'm sliding, and I throw my arms out and spread my legs out, trying to get friction, and it wasn't working. And as I looked, I saw the one living thing that was growing on that landslide. It was a tree about 1.5 feet in diameter, and I was going to pass it in about 2 seconds. And without thought, I threw my body to the left. I did a complete roll, landed on my back again, lined up, raised my feet, put them together, and I nailed that trunk. And I laid there with bent knees, and I listened to the rubble. It took a while before it was quiet again. I closed my eyes. When I opened my eyes again, it was just in time to see a small bird fly in, and it landed on my tree. It was a little grayback, white-bellied junco. It was ticked. And it said, chip, 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 chip. And it jumped from branch to branch, very agitated, literally glaring at me. I felt like that little kid being scolded by their mother, and I deserved it. And then another bird flew in, and it landed on my tree. And it was a hummingbird. And it just sat there, and it just looked at me. But the jungle wasn't done. It said, chip, 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 which basically meant, don't you ever do anything so stupid again. And I literally apologized out loud. But when I looked at that hummingbird, I could feel the love. Don't you ever, but I love you. I got the message. When they left, I was ready. I just got up and walked the woods. I was older now, and this day you would have found me sitting on a picnic table, cross-legged again. Hot day, June, 90 degrees, humid, local metro park. But the sweat running down my face wasn't the only thing that made it wet, the tears. I had just left the doctor's office where he had told me that that child that I wanted so desperately and had tried for 5 years wasn't there anymore. So I did what I always did. I'd go to the park, I'd go to the woods, and I'd find grandmother. And we had a talk, and I said, I'm exhausted. I don't know if I should keep trying. I don't know if I should just be grateful because I have a child. What more should I be asking for? So I surrendered. I completely let go, and I said, I'm not here to ask for what I want. What I need is a sign or a symbol. You tell me, what should I do? But, I said, could you be real clear about it? Because you know how thick-headed I am. I want something really clear and obvious so there's no doubt. Whatever you think. But please let me know. And and by the way, I'm not leaving until you give me a sign. And I waited. I waited 5 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. And as I gazed out across the mowed grass into where the woods began, I saw where a tree had fallen. And I saw movement. And as I watched, the biggest, fattest, furriest, nocturnal mama raccoon climbed up on that log and paraded herself in a way there was no way I could miss her. And then climbing up right behind her was one baby raccoon. And then there was 2. And 3. And 4. I said, whoa. But I knew, and I had no doubt. The next month, I found out I was expecting. And raccoons moved into my life. They were everywhere. And a family of raccoons moved into our chimney. And I would get up secretly in the middle of the night sometimes and just sit on the couch. And I could listen to the chortling sounds that they made when they talked. And it brought me comfort. This is a picture of Swickard Woods. It's a natural area just outside these doors, right here in the heart of New Albany. One of those stories I just told you about happened right there. You see, you don't need to go to a national park. You don't need to put on a backpack and hike for 4 days into the backcountry. All you need to develop a relationship and conversation with grandmother is to walk out your door. Find a place you like and sit down. Grandmother doesn't care if you're indigenous, European, Asian, African. She doesn't care if you're male or female, young or old. The invitation remains and has always been there since humanity has been with grandmother. It's your birthright. So when you go outside, I want you to imagine that you're taking an old friend out for a cup of coffee. And at first you're going to sit down and you're going to talk about superficial things, right? Maybe the weather. But every time you meet, the friendship develops a little bit more. You learn each other's language. And as that happens, you begin to develop a friendship of trust. And that trust turns into something deep. And someday will come when you need grandmother, and she will be there for you. And she will need you too. And you won't mind changing your schedule or going out and do something for her because that's what friends do for each other. You love each other. And when you have that bond of love between you, you can't even remember what it was like to live without it. So I would like to end with a quote from one of my favorite authors, Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she wrote, "Knowing that you love the earth changes you. It activates you to defend, protect, celebrate. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that feeling transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. I wish that for you." Happy conversations.